Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Swish for Real. It's your boy Big Mike and my co-host Boogie Boy. What's up, Boogie?
Yo. Just celebrated a birthday Monday, going to the Mavs preseason game and got me on the dance cam. So it's been a good week and a blessed week already.
I seen that. I sent you a text message. So I seen you on the cam. And we have a special guest. And I've been trying to get this guy for a minute. He announced his game for FIBA and quite a few other organizations. Aaron Sanders, what's up with you, man?
Hey, good to be here with both of you guys. Big Mike, Boogie Bob. I feel like it's a homecoming for me. Two Texans and one former Texan. You got to get the best of both worlds. Glad to be here, gents.
Thanks. Give the people a little bit about information about you, man, before we get started the podcast so they can kind of get acquainted.
Well, it all started when I was born. But seriously, I've been a sports broadcaster for 10 years, for nearly 10 years. Started as a PA announcer for my local college, and then that translated into doing play-by-play for Windsor Express basketball, the Basketball Super League, which a lot of people say that league is a springboard to the NBA G League, the NBA, and beyond. So I've been doing that for 10 years. My first job there was the co-host for the halftime post-game show. Then I add play-by-play to that, interviewing the coach. And in between, I do PA announcing for the university's volleyball team, for football, any sport you could think of. I think I pretty much did as announcing or doing play by play. So if I'm not doing that, then I end up calling the action for FIBA, and I'm also a ring announcer for one of the local wrestling organizations.
Nice.
So anywhere where there's a mic, I'm pretty much there. But then again, I always go with what my mama always told me when I was younger. You can't keep your mouth shut. And then I run my mouth more than I ran my legs. So I guess it worked out, and I hope she's proud too.
Thanks. I know we are
That,
excited to have you.
The pleasure's
that's
all
what
mine.
my mom would say. Find what you love doing and find a way to get paid for it. I said, well, mom, ain't nobody going to pay me to sleep. So, but now hopefully they pay me to talk.
Facts,
Yeah,
facts.
absolutely.
So, our first subject, we're going to talk about the benefits of two-way contracts when it comes to the NBA. And I've always had an idea that it's good to have a two-way contract when you first start out and you're not a known name when it comes to like NCAA or even the G League for that matter. Bob, we're going to start with you with this first question. What are the benefits of having a two-way contract?
Well, I wrote down 4 points, but I'll just say, we talk a lot about the Mavericks here, so I'm going to use a recent example, like just this
Mhm.
week. AJ Lawson had been
AJ
on two-way
Lawson.
contract for a couple
Back.
years, and then he got cut. Uh, and just today they announced that they signed him back to a two-way contract. Uh, so the first thing I wrote down, which is why before Isaiah Thomas destroyed the old CBA, and we're not talking about collective bargaining agreement, we're talking about the minor league CBA basketball.
Hmm.
Uh, the initial the the G League was sponsored by the NBA to develop talent, and so development wasn't the initial reason why you had the G League, and that's one of the major benefits of a two-way contract. Uh, and I'll point out there's one thing that where the Mavs messed up. I saw Jaden Hardy when he played for the Legends, and they had
Hmm.
him playing shooting guard and not point guard. They had Nashawn Wright, the fourth, playing point guard. And I'm like, why aren't they not playing him at point guard? He's not going to be a shooting guard in the NBA. And they missed the opportunity for him to get point guard experience in the G League and develop it. Uh, the second thing I had was sometimes it just comes down to roster space. You got guaranteed and non-guaranteed contracts, and so if you need roster space to have a guaranteed contract, it's an easy way to hide somebody in the G League because you don't. The other is cap space. So if you got someone on a two-way contract, they can only play a maximum, I think, of like 45 games in the NBA. But
Yeah,
it
it's
is a
considered
way
50 games. Yeah, they get to play about 50 games with their NBA team.
50. Okay. They but that is a way to where you can kind of hide some talent. It's kind of like a practice squad in the football, but I mean they're technically under contract, but it doesn't count toward your cap space. So one of the reasons they cut AJ Lawson was it kept them under the first apron uh, with the new CBA. And then probably the fourth, and it's minor, but it's really big, is injury protection.
Mm.
You have someone blow out a knee early in the season, so you got your next player up. Maybe he tweaks an ankle in a game. Now you got your third person. So having that extra person on a two-way contract that you can call up, especially for those that don't know that are watching podcast, Texas Legends is in Frisco, so it's just 20, 30 miles from downtown Dallas. So it's local. And so you're not traveling all over the country like when you're in Major League Baseball, you're going from AAA up to Major League. So most of the most of the G League teams are right in the same city. So you can develop them, coach them, and if you need to bring somebody up in emergency for a game or two, you've got injury protection.
Yeah, and then the rosters they have you they expanded in 2017 from 15 to 17 players. So that additional two spots for the players, those are the ones that have the two-way contract,
Yeah, this year it's up to three players on a two-way contract.
which is amazing because with the Players Association fight for that, I agree that anytime, like you said in the beginning, if somebody get injured, you have to have enough players on those type of contracts to kind of fill your roster out. And sometimes in the middle of the season, depending on if it's uh, before the free agency starts up, you'll be able to sign a player at that point in time.
Yeah, a lot of these people like uh, Do- Dodo, Dorian Finney-Smith. He was on someone else's team during the summer league, and the Mavs plucked him, and he was started on a two-way contract. But another organization we talk a lot about. Look how many players the Heat have brought up that nobody
Hmm.
heard of. They weren't drafted that were on two-way contracts, and then next thing you know, Tyler Hero and Max Strus and their starters, and Duncan Robinson.
Yeah, they are actually some great players that the Heat be. I don't know how they be finding them, man. They be just picking them out of just like, hey, let me have him. Give me him. They were just picking them out of people's G League. Aaron, your thoughts on the benefits of two-way contracts when it comes to the NBA?
You're talking about a gold mine when it comes to these contracts. First and foremost, I want to preface by saying this. By the way, you two, we talk about the old CBA. There was one team named the Albany Patroons, and they are a part of the Basketball Super League sister league called the Basketball League now, and they still play at the old Washington Avenue Armory to this day. So they have very good roots to the CBA, and they still mention it to this day. I feel like when it comes to the two-way contracts, I think I'm going to sound like one of the Generation Zers or whatever it is. I think it all comes down to exposure. It doesn't matter if you're a backup player or the star player of a G League and then you work your way up to the second string of the NBA. At least people will know that you made it to the big time. It could be your mom or your dad, brother, sister, family, or whatnot. I feel like I don't want to say from a personal standpoint, but I'll say it anyway. I feel like there's pride to the two-way contracts because a lot of people don't realize how hard it is to make it in the NBA or be
Mhm.
recognized to go to the G League or whatnot. It takes a lot of hard work. There's a whole lot more to highlights from high school or university or college. A lot of stuff happens in the gym as early as 4 a.m. in the morning. But I feel like it comes down to exposure with these two-way contracts. And to your point, Bob, if somebody gets injured, it's like that old saying in sports, next man up. Gotta come in, do the job. And if they like what they saw down there for even for a few minutes, you're going to be on standby. They're going to have you in the back pocket and say, "Hey, we like what you did. Keep on doing what you do over in the G League. We're going to call you back up in no time." And there's less traveling time when it comes to that. Like you said, Frisco's not that far away from Dallas. You get called up, boom, there you go. Same could be said for all the other G League teams in the NBA, like Rip City Remix. You could be called up to the Portland Trailblazers soon enough. Austin Spurs, San Antonio. So not
Mhm.
only you got proximity in your favor, but you also got the exposure that you need to help jumpstart your career.
It's amazing that we have a lot of teams that does that. If you could think of one team that has had besides Miami, what Bob mentioned, what team you think has had the best productivity when it comes to having two-way contracts? I know one team in my mind, but I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Whew, that's tough. Who's going to go for? Well, I guess I could say, well, for example, I mean, he may not be as successful in the NBA, but I believe that the LA Lakers, when they had
I was
Andre Ingram for,
That's what I was
a
going to
few
say.
years ago, that
Yeah.
that is one of those feel-good stories you like to
Mhm.
hear in sports, and he was able to make it, even though he played for either. I forgot whether it was a few minutes or for a few games. That just goes to show when you put in the hard work, this is the result. And when it comes to the LA Lakers, I believe their old D League team was the LA Defenders, if I'm not mistaken, before they took the Laker name. And
Mhm.
they have a handful of players. And same with the Toronto Raptors, Raptors 905. We saw great players. I think Siakam came from the 905. There was
Mhm.
another there was another player that I'm blanking on right now, but he also ended up playing where the Windsor Express used to play in the old National Basketball League of Canada, and he struck it rich there. But there were a lot of players from the Raptors and from the Lakers G League team or farm team, if we're going to go into older terms, that have struck it rich in the NBA, whether it be by one game or even a whole week.
Right. So the benefits of being in the G League, what do you I think like let's take Bronny for example. You think he would benefit more to be in the G League right now and put on a two-way contract, or you think he's just basically just floating right now until he finds his way into the I guess the starting lineup? Well, not even the starting lineup, but basically a bench player for the Lakers.
Hmm. I think he would benefit much from the G League and then work his way there because the way I see it, he's already got a lot of pressure being LeBron's kid. And
Hmm.
I actually I saw him play in one of the Michigan State under 13 tournaments a few years ago, and I had a feeling he had the makings of either a good two or three player. But if he plays in South Bay, then I think that will up his game a little bit.
Hmm.
It'll bring the crowd and witness either one or two things. Either he's going to be just like his dad or he's going to be far different because when it comes to famous athletes' sons, whether it be a Scottie Pippen or a Michael Jordan, they didn't fare well that much. But if you go to baseball and you talk about Ken Griffey, that's a whole different story.
Oh,
Prince
different
Fielder
story.
or Cecil Fielder, that'd be good. But I think when it comes to these kids these days, hopefully I'm not going off on a tangent, I feel like a lot of people are gonna say, "Oh, they're gonna be just like their mom or their dad," and then they end up putting up goose eggs. So this is what a development league is there for, to help them get ready for the big time and hopefully complement their father or anybody else. So I hope to see him in the South Bay Lakers. I hope he gets nothing but the best in this experience, but I think he's going to average what our friend Charles Barkley would say, a triple single if he's picked with the Lakers for the first few weeks of the season. But that's just me.
Yeah, because that two-way
I think
contract.
there's pros and cons. If he goes to G League, he'll definitely get more minutes,
Yeah.
and he'll be playing against older players, so he'll still get his comeuppance.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, and
if he
I agree.
plays if he plays with the Lakers, then LeBron can coach him firsthand right there on the court. So it's, do you want minutes or do you want your daddy's coaching? But there's I'll throw one name out there and get your feedback, but the Spurs are pretty good about using two-way contracts and developing players. Uh, the Jonte Murray, came out of nowhere. But
Mhm.
lest we forget, and he had until he blew out, I think it was his knee. Remember when Lynn Sanity and the New York Knicks was a big
Mhm.
deal?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And
Oh, man.
he was sleeping on somebody's couch, and I don't know if he played in the G League, but I know he's sleeping on somebody's couch and got a 10-day contract because I think back then it was like 10-day contracts were the rage. And he scored on Kobe and asked Kobe, what they thought about him, and he said, well, the dude put it in the bucket.
It's as simple as that. I remember Lynn's Sanity. Canada would not stop talking about it, but it's hard to go up against the guy. First off, he knocked down a cold-blooded Trey with seconds to go against
Hmm.
Toronto, and that's where a lot of people said that's where Lynn's sanity began. And then the rest of the season played out, and it was magical because, let's face it, the Knicks needed some sort of spark at the time. They were long away from the days of Patrick Ewing and the Latrell Sprewells and the Marcus Cambys. Let's just say they were in the cellar at that time. And then
Yeah, because
Lynn
they had
Sanity came in, and then J.R. Smith. Oof. Talk about that
They
combo.
they needed
yeah,
to sell some tickets, as we say. They
yeah, but
needed they
then
needed
they
to
had
sell some
Carmelo
tickets.
Anthony on that team as well.
That's right. And Madison Square Garden definitely turned to the Garden of Eden at that time.
Speaking of the Garden of Eden, speaking of women in general, the WNBA Finals, the matchup is set, and I want to get you guys' thoughts on who you think is going to come out on top as far as the winner of the WNBA. And we're going to start with you, Aaron, first. I know you probably had a lot of opportunity to watch a lot of games and seeing Caitlin Clark just rip it up. The girl's been phenomenal, even though they got put out, and now we have the Liberty in there. Give me your thoughts on who you think will win it and why.
I first want to apologize to the fans of Caitlin Clark. I was against her when she was in college because all you saw in the highlights were her shooting threes like she was Steph Curry, but I realize how good of a player she is now. I will say this, I will give her roses at a perfect opportune time, and this is no better time than now. But the WNBA finals, it sort of shocked me because again, I thought I was going to see Aces and Liberty part two, but we
Mhm.
saw that earlier in the matchup based on how everything was seeded out. But I got my money on the Liberty this time. They have suffered so much in every WNBA finals that they've been a part of. You go into the late 90s against the Houston Comets, and then you go to last year, which I'm sure was a heartbreaker because you had great players like Brianna Stewart and Aya Nezu, who suffered in a huge way in those final few
Mhm.
games before the Aces won it on their home floor. But I think they got the job to do it. Stewart's coming off a great gold medal run in the Olympics, and she's playing like never before. I feel like Aya Nezu is going to get her shooting to go. But then again, you look on the other end for the Minnesota Lynx,
Mhm.
you got Nafisa Collier for crying out loud. And I feel like I could, and a lot of people get mad when they compare one player to another, but I feel like with the numbers and the way she plays, give her 2 to 3 years, I think she could develop that dream shake, the way she takes care of business at the rack. I hope it goes the full 5 games because that would be a good bookend to the way that plays out because as a lot of people know, next year, they're gonna move into a best of 7, which they should have done for the longest time.
Mm.
But I feel like it's going to go all the way to the 5 games. Everybody's going to get their money's worth. They're going to see the best either inside or out. There's that money again. And I think Barclays Center and the Target Center, oh, they're going to be in for, I think, one of the most toughest WNBA finals matchups we've seen in a few years. And the Lynx have experience in the finals too, but I feel like they're closer to another championship than they've had in the last few years, especially against the Sparks.
So you picked the Lynx.
I picked the Liberty. I try to play both sides. Sorry, that's confusing. But the Liberty in 5. There will be Liberty in Brooklyn, New York.
So for the fans who are younger, when he said Dream Shake, that is a reference to Hakeem Olajuwon. So I just want to put that out
And it ties in with all the Texas things, former San Antonian, Dallas, and whatnot. Go down the I-10. There you go, folks.
there. Boogie Boogie Bob. Give me your predictions on the WNBA championship. Who's winning it and why are you saying that?
Well, 2 weeks ago, I said it was going to be the Liberty and the Lynx. We did our predictions before they even started. So, how's that commercial go? Liberty, Liberty, Liberty.
No, no sponsors.
But I'm gonna. Uh, there's a coach from the Cowboys, and he used to. I'm gonna use one of his quotes: "Film don't lie."
Well, it definitely wasn't Landry.
No, it's a Cowboy assistant coach. They call him Stretch
Mm.
Smith. But to your point on uh, Nafise Collins, she's the first player to score 25 points and 10 assists 3 consecutive games in the playoffs. So, and she put in last night, the Lynx won, and so in overtime, and she scored to win the bucket. But I'm sticking with my prediction. I called Lynx Liberty 2 weeks ago when we did it on this podcast. I'm sticking with the Liberty. This is their third time to be in the finals. Third time's the charm. And I've just got one more thing to say. How about that Caitlin Clark, CC, winner of Rookie of the Year?
Yes, sir.
100% agree with that. And a lot of people say, well, because she's with the Fever, it's going to take a long time for her to develop her game. But I think she did that in the fastest time. A lot of people say it's a popularity contest. No, it's not. No, it's not. She's very humble when it comes to the game, to the first year. She knows it's going to be the school of hard knocks, and she was able to adapt to it, no matter bumps or bruises or any fouls. She's got to cool her temper just a little bit, though. I remember watching one game a few weeks ago. She got a technical foul, I guess, for hitting one of the basket supports, which I think is one of the weakest technical fouls you could think of. But this is a basketball show, not about officiating. But if she's able to calm it down, oh my goodness, the WNBA.
She has it. I'll say this: she may have in-game temper, but much like LeBron, when you see the interviews, she's well prepared and very classy and keeps it above board, and she doesn't cause unnecessary conflict. We talked about this last week on the podcast. So if you subscribe to Swish for Real up there in the corner, you can go back and play it. But here's what Caitlin Clark, how she affected. In attendance increased 48%. Average attendance at a game went from 6,615 to 9,807. And get this, it went from 45 sellouts last year to 154 sellouts this year. But when we're talking about money, Caitlin Clark and Angela Reese have the opportunity to make the NBA what Magic and Bird did.
Yeah.
Make that the rivalry.
She's from what I've watched, and I post anytime I can get, even if it's just a picture. I posted as a short about Caitlin Clark. And call it Caitlin Mania, but I'm just dubbed her CC or C squared. Maybe one of those two I might use, but she's the real thing.
The only problem I'd be having with Caitlin Clark is that she may leave the league, because right now she's not being feel welcome, like, because she's being beat up and bruised, and she's looking to probably move over to the Euro League. And if that happens, what's going to happen to the WNBA is going to be drastic, because all the money that she brought in, basically from all the eyes that are on her, it's going to make the whole league go back down to where
the WNBA won't. The NBA that sponsors them won't let that happen. They'll find a way to get revenue sharing in there or something. So the NBA loves marketing. They're probably the best of all the sports. They're probably the best at marketing. I know football may be the number one and jersey sales of all that, but when it comes to brand and marketing, nobody's better than the NBA, in my opinion. I don't think that they would let the WNBA get that far. They find a way to make her stay.
And keep in mind, too, there's going to be more teams joining the WNBA in the next few years. So either way, the attention and the exposure is there. And of course, I'm talking about Toronto and Golden State coming up soon. And I think Portland's going to get an expansion team, too, in a few years. That'll be the second time they get a chance at it. So no matter what happens, I think the WNBA is going to be all right. They're going to have a new TV deal. NBC's coming back for both the NBA and WNBA. So if Caitlin Clark stays, there's going to be a lot of eyes geared towards CC, whether it be on streaming devices or over-the-air television. So the next few years is going to be the ultimate test to see how far can the WNBA go with merchandise, with products, all that other stuff. As long as she stays, the revenue and the
attention will go up. Bigger arenas. They need to be playing in bigger arenas, not college arenas.
Well, they did that at the beginning of the WNBA. Houston Comets, they played in the Summit. The LA Sparks, they played at Forum, and then they moved to Staples Center. I think they're one of the few teams that still play in an NBA arena. I feel like the Dallas Wings, they should play at the AH Center, no doubt about it. Mark my words, in the next few years, they're definitely going to think about that.
Yeah, I hope so. No, and that'll be something that we can use as far as the WNBA goes, because they do need a lot more eyes on it. Because without those eyes, there's not going to be very big TV contracts for that league in general. Let's shift over to back to the NBA, and we're going to talk about legacies, and we're going to start with you first, Aaron. I don't know how much you had an opportunity to go back and look at some of the games this guy had, and his nickname is the Glove, and that was his moniker, to play defense and be one of the best and the specialists in when it comes to defense. And we're talking about Gary Payton. What kind of legacy would he have had or should have with the Seattle Supersonics? Supersonics. And he moved on to, I believe, Miami after that a few years later. But your thoughts on the legacy of Gary Payton?
Let's go back to 2002, 2003. I remember renting out a VHS from Hollywood Video called NBA Hardwood Heroes. And that's where I learned the story of Gary the Glove Payton, the savior of the Emerald City, and he made it shine for as many years. When he started out as a rookie, nobody thought he would make it big, this Oakland native. And then he
Mm-hmm.
had great players to work around with, like Sean Kemp,
Mm-hmm.
Vin Baker, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the 02-03 season, he gets traded to the Milwaukee Bucks in exchange for Ray Allen.
Mm.
And I thought that was a bad move to begin with, even as a 7-year-old, because you're losing the character that the Seattle Supersonics have had since he was drafted there in 1990. His defensive prowess was something to behold. A lot of people only know Gary Payton now because he was doing all that trash talk, and that was featured on The Last Dance with the Chicago Bulls. But the Gary Payton that we all know, he was a pest defensively. He was a
Facts.
good playmaker, and I think he was more of a defensive player than offensive player, and that surely showed. He was able to complement the players, and on top of that, he would back up what he said most of the time. So you're talking about a dynamite guard who could do pretty much everything. And a lot of people are saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, Aaron! One or two guys could do that already, whether if you're a point guard or a shooting guard." But no, this guy was the near epitome of what the '90s brought in: grit, grind, character, and there's something about players from the West Coast that could
Mm.
really uh, give it their all. I mean, maybe sometimes if you mention his defense, if you mention his trash talking, you think he'd be a smaller version of Bill Laimbeer. And I firmly believe he was a smaller version of Bill Laimbeer. But the problem with that was he didn't give a lot of chances to win the championship. He won one with Miami in '06, which I
Mhm.
keep on forgetting because he went from Seattle, Milwaukee, Boston for a year, and then Miami, and that pretty much closed the career of one Gary Payton. But he was still great as defense, and I think he should be taught as a great lesson on how to play basketball on both ends of the floor and back up your words too. And I've seen him play against the Spurs so many times, and I thought they were going to knock them out back in '02, but thank goodness they didn't.
So, if I had to compare him to any current NBA player, and I'm not trying to say that he, well, comparatively, even equals to this guy, but I would think Patrick Beverly, in my
Mhm.
opinion, kind of
Amen.
reminds me of a pesky defensive player. But only difference is Peyton can score at the same time, but Patrick Beverly is not known for his scoring. Would you agree with that, or who would you kind of compare him to in current NBA status?
I agree with that, and minus Patrick Beverly's temper, we saw that a couple of years ago. I 100% agree with that. I feel like the name of the game for basketball is defense. How do you conduct a good offense? By
Hmm.
executing a proper defense. And I think Gary Payton was able to characterize that, and same with Patrick Beverly to this day.
Yeah, Pat, you right. Dude, attitude is crazy, but I mean, he plays great defense. He's pesky as hell, but I don't know why. People keep picking him up, but I kind of get it because he plays great defense. But I think comparing him to Payton is the only person I can think of when it comes to pesky and always in your face, and he talks crap at the same time. Gary Payton and Patrick Beverly is like one in the same when it comes to defense. But offense, Gary Payton was the truth. He could hoop. You know what I mean? You know how you have hoopers and you have people just only skilled at one thing. Patrick Beverly is skilled at one thing. It was defense. He pesky to on you, but Payton, oh, I'm the glove. And he used that to his ability to make himself be even better on defense and then push himself forward offensively.
And he could hurt you on the fast break, too. I feel like the Supersonics back then were like the 90s Showtime. Before the 7 seconds of offense for Phoenix, you had the Seattle Supersonics, and it was because it was started by Gary Payton. And it was
Mm-hmm.
Sean Kemp slams, but it was all started with the glove.
Not facts. Moving on to you, Boogie Bob. The legacy of Mr. Glove, Gary Payton. Give us your thoughts on it.
Well, first of all, I'm going to disagree with you about Patrick Beverly. I understand the peskiness, but to me, Patrick Beverly had resorted to thugness, and Gary Payton was never a thug, even when he got older and slower.
Mhm.
To me, a better comp is Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday will lock you up, and if you leave him open, he can score,
Okay.
and he can
But Drew
he can
Holiday
run.
is not like pest, though. I mean, Gary Payton was a pest for sure, and so is Drew
Well, but it's just
Holiday.
like Luca said, you can't guard me. You can't guard me. It didn't matter how pesky. I'll give you the peskiness of that, but Drew Holiday does it quietly, and I think he's ever bit the defender, or maybe even better than Beverly, but has that scoring element that Peyton.
Okay.
Uh, and I'm gonna uh, So on this show, we talk about leaving meat on the bone. Aaron, thanks for leaving some meat on the bone. And I'm always going over stats. We like to do the player legacy. Career numbers for Gary Payton: 16.3 points per game, 3.9 rebounds per game, 6.7 assists per game. That was his career. 17 seasons, 9-time All-Star,
Mm,
8 times voted for Defensive Player of the Year. He won Defensive Player of the Year 1 time. 9 times was All NBA, twice on the first team. 9 times NBA first team defense. 8 times voted in the top 10 of MVP race. In 95-96, he led the league in total steals with 231 and averaged 2.9 steals per game.
beast. 2.9?
That
Wow.
that's 3 buckets. That's a 12-point swing there. And
Nah.
that 95-96 Seattle team, you know, they're as much well known by getting beat by Denver, but they won 60, 64, 65 games, and back then there weren't many teams that won 60 plus games. Gary Payton did get to play in 3 NBA finals. So before I go over which ones, I'd like to know from you, Aaron, what would you give you if you would have been able to announce Seattle versus Chicago, Gary Payton versus Michael Jordan? How much would that be to you being an announcer? How much would you have enjoyed that?
Well, that would definitely be the marquee matchup. You have somebody that is a master, a master lock presence in defense, and then you got Michael Jordan who could do pretty much anything. I think it'd be the ruler of the words between those two, and I would have fun calling that. And it'd be good for broadcasters to be a pest and say, "Well, Gary Payton said this about Michael Jordan before the game or before the series." And then you have to see how Michael Jordan will respond. It was the same year where MJ and the Bulls went 72-10. So
Mm,
you already know they're already the favorite. And Seattle was the underdog in a Western Conference that was tough to get over. Mind you, you had Utah waiting in the wings, the Rockets at the end of their 2-title run. And
facts.
for Seattle to topple over all of them, mind you, they're going to be the underdog because of that 72-win season that certain Windy City team has had. So you're going to have fun with that. It's a matter of East Coast versus true West Coast, and I would have had a ball.
David versus Goliath.
Bingo.
So Gary Payton played in 3 NBA finals. As we just talked about, he played against Chicago, that three-peat. And I did I still have a program from the 72 win Chicago Bulls when Tony
Nice.
Kukoc was on that team. So
Oh,
I got
yes.
to see that team in person. He played for the Lakers
That's
when they
right.
lost to Detroit in 2004 with Rasheed Wallace. And as Aaron mentioned, he played Miami in 06. And that was the first one I mean, other than Chicago, that's the one I remember because Gary Payton had 1 2-pointer. Miami won the game by 1. It wasn't a winning shot, but it was in the fourth quarter. And he was a bench player. He got, you know, 10, 15 minutes a game. You're talking on the back end of his career. But when he needed to hit the shot, he hit the shot. And a lot of people forgot about that. They were happy that he got a ring. But 17 seasons, he got to play in the finals 3 times. One as a star, one in the middle of the career, and one at the end of his career. The next question we'll be talking about, but there's a lot of players that never get to play in 1 NBA Finals, let alone 3. So the legacy I have from Gary Payton is he was one of those players you loved him when he's on your team, you hated him when he was on the other team.
The fact that he was a great defensive player, man, it just speaks volumes about his career wise. And I think like him and Sean Kemp is like looking at, and you mentioned it earlier, Aaron, Utah with John Stockton and Karl Malone. But the difference between the two is well, John Stockton was a defensive master anyway, and plus he was also proficient in assists. The only difference I would see would be like Sean Kemp's ability to jump above the rim and get everything that Gary Payton threw up and bring it right back down. So, I mean, he had
And
amazing.
Lynn Baker, and wasn't Detlef Shrimp on that team as well?
That
Shrimp
list was a
and
three-point
Sean Perkins,
specialist.
was it?
Yes, Sam Perkins.
And Sam Perkins was a Dallas draftee, wasn't it? When Dallas drafted
Yeah,
him back in the 80s?
he was the 4th pick. A little
Yes.
bit of trivia. I'll tell you someday about that. But yeah, I mean, you had Shrimp and Perkins, and that team was loaded with talent. Spurs were still up and coming. The Lakers were on the way down, but they were still good. And you had Sacramento. I mean, the West was a bulldozer to get to the finals.
No, facts. And considering what we was talking about as far as finals go, I know FIBA has their own finals and the NBA has their finals. I wanted to talk to you, Aaron, about what is the difference between FIBA and the NBA, and kind of give the audience a little bit of a breakdown of what the differences are, and we can kind of get an understanding of what we can kind of see. What I know there's different rules, but just give the audience a little bit of information on the difference between FIBA and NBA.
I believe the biggest difference between FIBA and NBA is when you look at a FIBA game, you realize it's more team oriented. In the NBA, especially in this generation where everyone believes the camera's on them, you get more ISO games in the
Mm,
NBA. You try to do everything for the cloud and for the highlights, but FIBA, you realize that when you play for a team, it's just like the Olympics. You're playing for your country, you're playing for a region, and they understood that. Luka Doncic went through that same thing, and I wasn't a believer in Doncic when I saw him play in Europe before he came into the NBA. I thought he was a little too slow when it comes to moving up the floor, a little methodic when it comes to his play calls, but he changed that up when he got drafted to the Mavericks, and I'm very proud to see him excel. And for FIBA, one of the obvious rules is it takes less time to finish a game than it does in the NBA. NBA, I would say about 2.5, 3 hours, but FIBA, since they play 10-minute quarters, you could finish a game as few as an hour and 55 minutes. So around the 2 hour thing, because They speed it up. There's not a lot of full court defensive pressure in FIBA as well. And they don't pay a lot of attention to the three unless they have to. There was one game that I called not so long ago. A lot of people, they started relying on the threes at the beginning of the game, but they realized they had to spread the floor. So they were able to play the entire 90 feet of the floor from fast breaks to the other end. Boom. So I feel like for FIBA, it's more of a game where you have to stick together, play together, stay together. And that's a huge difference in the NBA.
Let me ask you this question though. When FIBA kind of got started, I think it's more of what the Olympics did to kind of bring that to the forefront. When the Dream Team, when the first Dream Team came on the scene, the NBA wasn't much of a forefront when it comes to European viewership. What are your thoughts on that? How did that make a difference between seeing the Dream Team and then the elevation of European basketball at that point?
Yeah, 1992 made a huge difference because everybody in the world, including their mothers, knew the name Michael Jordan. And when they allowed NBA or professional players to play instead of players that came out of the college or the university, it brought up a lot more popularity and more attention to the game than ever. Because, well, remember that Dream Team, that was the same year where Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen first saw the greatness in Tony Kukoc when they met together. So now you see all the international players coming in and realize, hey, if these NBA players are good, just imagine how powerful I could be if I decide to work my way up to the NBA because there were a lot of other leagues around the world that were as popular and people knew their names. Like, for example, Andrew Gaze, who played in the National Basketball League in Australia, a league that is still running long to this day. You also have the Greek leagues. There's also basketball in Japan. And then we can't talk about a great surge in the game of basketball in the world without mentioning Africa with the BAL. And I think the presence of, let's say, Dikembe Mutombo did something to do with that. A great story, may he rest in peace. Like he was pretty much the great hope for Africa, along with Hakeem Olajuwon and the others. But that 1992 Olympics with the Dream Team, it brought a whole lot in the world. Even though they caught on to the game of basketball too late, I think it has caught up and it's taking over the NBA and the game of basketball by storm.
So, an additional question for that, I know I had a comment back in the day. It's reference to what Mark Cuban said that as far as the European basketball, the kids are taught the basketball differently from what we do in America, which I agree. And he pretty much said that the European way of playing is better than what the American play is, and I kind of respect that as well. But the only difference is, I think the more the American kids are more athletic. So, just to ask you this question, do you think there's a true difference as far as how we teach the game here in the US versus what's taught in Europe?
I believe there is. I feel like in the NBA, you have the fundamentals, but over in Europe, it's all about execution, moving the ball around. If you have to establish a triangle offense, you have to make sure you do it right. And there's no, I don't think in FIBA or in Europe, there's a set position. Like if you're a center, you have to do center things. No, you could also shoot from outside or in the mid range or even set up an extra pass for the point guard to slash right in for the bucket. But I believe that's what it comes down to, that there is a huge difference. And how interesting is it, gentlemen, that in the last decade or so, you got players that either used to play in the NBA or looking for a big opportunity. They're going overseas and they're prospering. That's the beautiful game, isn't it? When you could go to overseas for a challenge, for a chance to win a championship, try to make a name of yourself. You go overseas and you get all those awards. You can imagine that's what Stephon Marbury did. Yeah, you can imagine that's what one of the Ball brothers did in the NBL. It helped them out. and it gives a
And
huge difference.
Dante Exum on the current Mavericks, he left Utah and went over there and played a couple years.
Bingo. Well, there you go too. So it's the beautiful game. It's like we're seeing more Americans adapting to the European game and the game all around. And it goes to show you don't have to be from a certain country to go there and lead them to the championship. It's versatile. It's good for everyone.
So there was a picture on ESPN, the '96 Olympic team and the 2024 Olympic team. The '96 Olympic team had MJ and Bird, Magic, Barkley. I mean Ewing. It was star-studded. They only played against 9 NBA players. The 2024 men's Olympic basketball team played against 45 NBA players. So you just see that. I remember, this is going way back, but Drazen Petrovic,
Mm-hmm.
he came over, and Peja Stojakovic and Sabonis's dad, Arvidas.
Arvidas.
So they're in the late '90s. They were starting to creep in, and that's one of the things Donnie Nelson hung his hat on, because he coached like the China team and some of the other teams, so he scouted the European. Now you got every NBA team scouting Europe, but even as far as China and Yao Ming.
So I have one last question for you, Aaron, and then we're going to ship it over back to Bob. So I always question whether we're teaching our youngsters as far as basketball fundamentals here in America. I know, like, we're looking back at Luka's career. He went from like being basically trained as a 7-year-old all the way up to where he went to a championship with Real Madrid. We don't have anything similar to that here in the United States, where you have club teams, where we have AAU teams, but they're not basically built like they have in Europe. So the way they're structured in Europe and the way they structure it in America, what are the differences you see in regards to those two different structures?
And I think when I was younger, I thought making it to the YMCA team was everything. And now you see all these players playing in club teams now. It's unbelievable. I wish I had that when I was about 5 or 6 years old. But there is a big discrepancy when it comes to that, Mike. And I feel like if there was a little more than that in the States or even in Canada too, I think players would be more developed. Because here's the thing, when a kid as young as, let's say, 3 year olds, for example, they turn on the TV and they see the NBA and they have the immediate passion or the love for it. I think they call it Basketball Jones or something like that. But anyway, their dreams is to make it to the NBA. And what's the closest thing they could get to playing in the NBA within their age? Unless if you're talking about the YMCA or their school team, there's not much to it. So they're watching basketball. They want to be just like a Luka Doncic or a Kyrie Irving or even a LeBron James. But I think the huge difference is, I think the Europe system, they're more passionate. And I'm not talking about the fans or the ultras. They set their mind to what they want to do and they don't play around. Over here in the States or in North America, yes, we have drills and we have scrimmages, but we all know it's not enough. And I wish North America is able to adopt uh, that format where you have club teams and let's say even when you're 10 years old or 11 or 12 outside of high school to help develop the game more. Just think of it as a high school version of the NBA G League. It's got to be there. We have prep leagues here in Canada, like Orangeville Prep and so on and so forth down the line, but I haven't heard anything about it in the States. And for me, I'm
Yeah,
a little saddened of
there's
that.
some prep. There's some prep academies. A lot of, because the NIL is not allowed in Texas high schools, so
Oh,
a lot of the top 10 top recruits out of Dallas are leaving for Mount Verde, uh, Oak Academy, Sierra Canyon. where Bronny played and Dwayne Wade's kid played. So every Thanksgiving there's a hoop fest, and so they bring a lot of these in, and a lot of the coaches for EBCU are there because they're looking at players to play on the 17 and under tournament, representing the U.S. Uh, so, and you got Jermaine O'Neal running Drive Nation. So I think you're starting to see the seeds of that being planted, but it just hasn't fully blossomed yet. Not to the degree that it has in Europe. Uh, and there's so much competition. There's like 4 Frenchmen drafted this last year, and you've got a smaller space that they play in, so the competition gets dwindled much quicker in Europe, in my opinion, versus in America. In America, it's like I don't know
It's
how
like
many
AAU
hundreds of
heaven here
thousands
in
of kids.
America. There's so many AAU teams. But Bob, I'm going to jump back to you real quick and try to finish up this FIBA versus the NBA differences. What are your thoughts on the differences between FIBA and the NBA?
Well, I'm not an expert in that, but the one thing I will say is uh, we had heard about Luca being in Dallas before they got drafted, and I looked at his stats and I wondered, like, how is this kid? Dirk played at 15 and 16 in Europe too, and was also drafted by the German army. So Nelly had to get him contract over here, but Aaron hit on it earlier. They play a 10-minute game, so the statistics from that league and the European don't translate. So it makes unless you got feet on the ground and scouts watching it, when you watch enough NBA, you get accustomed to what makes a good NBA player. It's not always an athlete. Like Justin Jackson was tall, 6'9", could run real quick, could jump, was an athlete, played North Carolina. He couldn't play the game in the NBA. So I can usually have them watched it for several decades. I can usually watch their first couple games and see, yeah, they're not going to make it or they are going to make it. And I remember seeing the preseason game after reading about Luca and seeing his stats in Europe and winning the championship, and I'm like, okay. And Trey Young going to my alma mater is kind of but the very first preseason game I saw Luca play, I like, oh yeah, he's the real deal. Like from day one, the eyeballs that have seen a lot of basketball, you could tell from day one he's a real deal. And some of it's coaching, some of it's skills training, some of it's what we talked about last week with basketball IQ. I I think the my perspective, the biggest difference is AAU. It's flash and splash, and
Yeah.
who can get the most points, and it's not so much. Yeah, there's a team, but the atmosphere. Those 10 guys are on the same team. Like, a few of them might be friends, but in Europe, that's like a collective city that's like fighting together, and
Mm.
and it's completely different. It's not just 10 people on one team. They're 10 people that are joined at the hip, and we don't have that here because it's all about get noticed, get a college recruiter to give a scholarship, and I got to score the most points so I can get NIL money or I can get an agent. And Europe, they're not worried about that. In Europe, there is like, I'm going to help the team as best I can. And if I'm good enough, I can make it. But they put in the work for the different mentality. They're not trying to be the best on the team. They're trying to be the best for the team.
Over
That's
here,
it.
it's more of the me era when it comes to high school basketball
Yeah.
nowadays. And when you put the phone up, when you press record, everybody they're not going to come to see a team as Bob said earlier, just here to hear and see about one player. I mean, that's what happened to Zion. That's what happened to LaMelo. And again, when I saw them, I'm like, okay, they got talent. All they could do is dunk and flash in a pan. And I'm not darning them by any ways, shape, or form. But again, when you have that kind of attention and it's all about me instead of team, then that creates a problem. You witness that culture shock the movement. You go to Europe and play basketball there. And I have to imagine there were a handful of NBA players that played, let's say, give or take a minimum of 2 years in the NBA and said, well, this is a whole different beast. Now I got to tone it down a little bit.
So I know you probably had an opportunity to interview some European players, and have you had an opportunity to ask them about their experiences between the U.S. basketball and European basketball?
I think the closest thing I ever got to interviewing anybody that played in the European League is what the Windsor Express and the Basketball Super League has, because they could play either in Greece or in Spain and they could average a good line stat. But that's the closest thing. I will say they realize there's a difference when it comes to North American basketball and overseas,
Hmm.
but they were able to adapt to either the NBLC or the BSL, is what we got today, because there are a handful of rules that are just like FIBA. 5,000 you're out, or other rules when it comes to the backcourt and so on and so forth. But I wish I was able to interview more European players and get a full grasp of what's it's like over there. I will say
No.
this. I had the pleasure of interviewing Glenn Big Baby Davis when he was in the National Basketball League in Canada. And he even said, this Canada game is very different.
So the only thing I was like, and then we'll move on to the next subject. I always wondered why they let you grab the ball off the rim in
Hmm.
FIBA, and then you can't do it in the NBA.
Even I knew that was goaltending back then if you grab it off the rim.
So yeah, you didn't give the ball the opportunity to drop. So you just like grab it and you gone. I'm like, okay, whatever. All right. So last subject we're gonna cover what the current ESPN player rankings is, and I'm pretty sure you guys had an opportunity to kind of review it. We're gonna start with you first, Aaron. I looked at it. I'm like, okay, Luca's here, and they got Joker here. What are your thoughts on the ESPN player rankings for 2024-2025 season?
It's a shocker, to say the least. So they have Doncic as number two. I have a feeling he's going to play with a vengeance. Just lost
Mhm.
to Boston for the championship. He'll be back. Jokic, he's still in his prime, but I was shocked to see a certain player that is number one on that ranking. And he doesn't play for Dallas. He doesn't play for Houston. Matter of fact, he's right down the I-10. And everybody knows who I'm talking about here.
The
It is
space
Wim.
alien.
It's the space alien himself, Victor Wembanyama. And again, I was against all this hoopla about Wembanyama when he got drafted, because I felt like if he would have played a few more years or a few years here in like college before he went to the NBA, that's fine. But that's a topic for another episode. But I'm surprised they're giving Victor, you know, a big grade right there.
Number
I
one.
well, number
That's
one.
crazy.
Now, I have a feeling that the Spurs won't make the playoffs again for another 2 to 3 years.
No
And now,
way.
yeah, I do. But then again, when you have a veteran like Chris Paul, who, let's face it, he's in the twilight of his career,
Yeah.
and I can't believe when he was a rookie, that's when I moved to Canada. That's how long it's been. But to rank him number one, I think that's a little too high. Does he deserve to be in the top 10? Yes, but not at top at number one. I feel like Doncic is going to have a much more aggressive game this year than Wembanyama will. And mind you, these are two players in two different positions. Doncic is a playmaker, and Victor, whew, my goodness, I would not want to meet him underneath the rim when it comes to defense.
He's a modern day Ralph Sampson with a lot more talent. And Ralph Sampson was very talented.
Hmm.
You know,
I still think Victor, him being one ranked in that ESPN ranking is crazy. And you're right. I think Luka's going to come out with a vengeance and try to show the world that he's able to uh, get the MVP as far as what he's been deserved for the last maybe 2 years, especially when uh, the bubble team when he he almost ended the Clippers season, but he couldn't get it out. Um, he was amazing, though. I really think they have him. I think Wimbiana one. I don't know about that, which is interesting, but I still think they should have put Luka as one.
Can I mention one more thing? I I'm not surprised where Halliburton was placed. I think he was fifth.
And I was
But
going to
Joel,
mention him. I was like, what? He should be lower in my opinion, but he's a good player.
he had a red hot season for the
Yeah.
Pacers. Stepped up in whatever that in-season tournament is called now, the playoffs, as I call it. But Joel Embiid, listen, party's over. We trusted the process for so many years, and you have to imagine how long will it take before he either gets away from the NBA or retires completely. I feel like this is his last chance to prove something, and he's got a lot. He's got a lot of eyes beaming down towards him. But rank
So
him as number 6?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm tripping on Shea Gillius Alexander though. SGA. I I don't what he's a good player. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be rude or trying to knock his game because he can hoop. I don't know if he's MVP worthy as far as what they are seeing in the media in regards to his game. You think he's like they got him ranked number 4 in this ESPN ranking. You think he's MVP caliber, Aaron? In your opinion?
Not yet. Give it give it again. 2 or 3 more years, he'll be okay. But again, I remember back then where it was mainly the centers running the game. It could be a Tim Duncan, it could be a Shaq running the floor. And now it's back to the guards. The game is back to the guards. But is he MVP worthy? Not now, not next year. But the Thunder, they have a good young team and they could run the floor. They streak like lightning, even though they're the Thunder.
And the only person that he reminds me of is Paul George. I cannot get Paul George out of my mind when I look at Shea Gillis Alexander,
Hmm.
which is amazing.
Paul George, man, that's a name I haven't heard in quite some time.
Yeah, I
So
want to
Aaron,
listen to
we're
more
always
Philly.
we've been talking about the MVP this year, and we talked about it last year. Who we thought, and I've said something a friend mentioned to me before you win it, you have to have a year that sets it up, a year that gets you noticed. And Luca broke so many records that hadn't been set. I mean, he is breaking Michael Jordan records and LeBron records. He is like one of the youngest players to 10,000 points. He had a 60-20-10 game. He had more games over 40 with double digit assists, triple double. I mean, you just go down the line, set any stat you want, not an arbitrary stat, but you look at just he's breaking all kinds of like records that when LeBron broke them, everybody's talking about, oh, he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And so I think last year was Luka's setup year, but SGA, in my mind, the reason Oklahoma City, and I had said it last year, I thought they were going to make the playoffs, but they surprised, probably overachieved last year. For them to
I
win
agree.
60
I
games,
agree.
I don't think they'll win 60 games this year, but the fact that he was the building block and that they finished first and they way overachieved where they were predicted, I think that got eyeballs on him. That uh, if Dallas starts off hot and has a good record where they did it last year, necessarily, I think Luka will get more attention. But it goes back to what we are talking earlier. SGA is flash and dash, and Luka, even though he has magic passes and shots, it's European versus American, and I don't know if there's any recency bias there, but because Jokic just won 3, I don't think they'll give him a 4th one.
So, Bob, what's your thoughts on that current ESPN player rankings? I know you had an opportunity to kind of view it and give your thoughts in depth. Uh, I still think SGA is an interesting position where he's at, and I'm not quite sure why they got Halliburton so high. But what are your thoughts on that same?
Well, there was a lot of them. I'm just like, what? I'm looking at them saying, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "Who voted on these people?" You know, and you couldn't vote for your own team. But I chose out of the top 20, I chose 3 overrated and 3 underrated players.
Mm.
But I will say this, I am so glad to not see Zion Williams' name in there because I watched him in Carolina and I'm like, everybody like he's the number 1 player. I'm like, I don't see it. And even when I saw him play the first year as a rookie, I'm like, I don't know what all the hubbub like. He's nothing more than Oliver Miller or a bigger version of Charles Barkley. I said he ain't gonna last. If you're not available, best ability is availability. And I just from the get go, I was not a Zion fan, so I'm so glad he wasn't in it.
He's
But
just a human highlight film when he just came out of Duke. It's like that. That's all there was to it.
Yeah.
He blew out a shoe, you know. But I had 3 players that I had as underrated. I had Giannis, I had Sabonis, and Steph Curry. I I I still think all 3 of them should be higher than what they were rated. I didn't write down where they were rated.
Yeah, because Steph's going to be playing pretty much by himself. This with Buddy Hill going to help him, but I still think it's going to be what you're going to do for us this year, Steph. Can you bring us back to the playoffs?
So, you know, we've said this before, it's easy to get stats on a bad team. And, you know, they caught lightning in a bottle a couple years ago and got by the Mavericks. You know, Andrew Wiggins played out as you know what, and Kuminga and some of the others stepped up. But I think you're going to see just the true, even though he's 35, 36, you're going to see the true greatness of Stephen Curry and how he's changed the game. I think he's underrated from where they had him. In Sabonis, I mean, in Sacramento with De'Aaron Fox, if they can stay healthy, you know, and Giannis, it's going to be this will be the second year with Damian Lillard. I think they'll get it figured out. But I
That
think
was
those
weird
3
for me
were
as far as
underrated.
him being in Milwaukee, Damian. I don't know. I just see him as Portland lifer for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm
Then
with you on that.
I had 3 players that were overrated, and 2 of these I know you kind of like 2 of these players.
Okay.
LaMelo Ball,
Yeah,
overrated.
I'm a fan of his. Yeah.
I know you're a fan, and he's good. And I mean, he's got hurt, and he's probably the best of the ball players. But I don't. He was higher than what I would have put him on the list. And this next guy you like as well, and we've discussed why he didn't flourish, but I don't see why Scotty Barnes was so high on the list.
Scotty Barnes, yeah, I can agree with you that because he's still really. Can he carry the team for Toronto is the question. I don't know if he can just yet. I would say he's a number 2 in my opinion. Scotty Barnes is good, but he needs a number 1 to help him elevate.
But to put LaMelo and Scotty Barnes in the top 20 of
14
all
and
the
15,
players,
yeah.
yeah, because I'm talking about the ones that these over and underrated. These were the top 20 on the list. I'm like, I don't put either one of those 2 in the top 20. And then this third guy, he's got traded so many times. I think he's left more money on the plane going from one city to another. But James Harden doesn't need to be a top 20
my
player, not anymore.
Yeah.
I'm like, in his heyday with him and Dwight Howard and Chris Paul. By the way, I'm glad you mentioned Chris Paul earlier, Aaron, because where Chris Paul's gone, the team's done better. He took Oklahoma City team that had nothing and took them to the playoffs. The Rockets got better. New Orleans, when they had Tyson Chandler, like every team he's been on has got better. But James Harden, this version of James Harden, Yeah, he can still hoop. He have a great game once every week or every couple weeks, but top 20? Come on now.
I
So
knew
you
when
don't
there
think
was
that's the James Harden of Houston days when he went to Houston and amazed the world with his ability?
I got to see him when, Mavs knocked him out and he was a six-man in Oklahoma City, and he ducked that head and it goes like this every time,
Yeah.
even when nobody's around, no hands around. Oh, I got hit in the head, and the NBA refs. We're not going to talk about officials, but I mean, he went to the line so many times because of that, and he looks like he's going this way when he's going to the rim, but he isn't. He's going straight. He just gives that shoulder,
That Euro
shoulder,
step.
shoulder, 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 but his actual foot's straight to the bucket. So, defenders, a lot like Dwayne Wade in the sense that he get people moving east and west, and he's going north and south while he did it. But, there's a little bit of James Harden in Luka's game. And that was one of the comparisons.
Yeah.
Uh, but Harden folds like a cheap tent in a windstorm.
no.
When the
Damn.
pressure's on and the bright lights are on, he like THJ. He crashes.
That's crazy that you said that. A cheap tent in a windstorm. That's
Well, they were a Chris Paul hamstring injury away from taking the Golden State Warriors out.
yeah. I remember that because when
And,
Chris
and
Paul
he shot
played with
something
Harden,
like one,
yeah.
1 for 27 from
Oh,
3-point
yeah.
range.
Yeah. I mean, Harden to me, I would say right now in his career, he's a little bit overrated in my opinion because right now he's more thinking about the clubs instead of thinking about basketball. So once he get that out of his system, maybe he can get back to where he was when he was in Houston, where he's really wanting to put the team on his shoulder and take them to that promised land. But I don't. I think he's kind of slightly overrated, and I don't want to bash his game because the dude can hoop. But yeah,
Well,
I don't see him
I'll
really.
tell you one guy that we both love that wasn't in the top 20, or at least I don't remember seeing him. Like, why wasn't Kevin Durant up in there?
Yeah, just at 22.
Yeah, thanks. Because KD, Slim Reaper, come on, man, that
I, I
dude was a
thought
beast.
I thought I was seeing the end of his career when he joined Phoenix, but I think he's able to complement Booker and the rest of the squad pretty well. And again,
Yeah,
I thought after all that stuff with the Warriors and then Brooklyn or whatever, I thought it was done. But I think he was a better player than Harden now.
Mm,
And it's crazy because those two used to be the nucleus of the early day OKC Thunder.
thanks.
along with
Yeah,
Westbrook.
Yep.
Amen. That too.
And Booker wasn't very high on the list either.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I
20.
I
mean,
mean,
I would take Booker over Scotty Barnes, even though I'm
you're right.
not a
You are.
Booker fan.
Neither am I, but I would too. I agree with you that man. So guys, the show has been an amazing success. Aaron, man, we appreciate you blessing us today, brother.
Oh, pleasure.
I do want to have you back on so we can kind of talk about announcers because we had did a podcast, some podcasts before, and we was kind of describing our favorite announcers and kind of how what they brought to the game of basketball. So we probably have to have you back on when you have an opportunity. Again, this has been an amazing show. We're going to let you guys close out and give everybody your social media handles, and we'll start with you first, Bob. Tell the people, everybody, where they can find you in social media in this internet streets, man.
They can always find me on Swish for real, and you can find me on Boogie Bob.
And that's all on
No
YouTube.
space.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And again, Aaron, man, thanks for jumping on. I hope we didn't take too much of your time. Tell everybody where they can find you at social media wise, and give them a little bit more information about you, and then we'll close it all out.
I don't know what I did the last hour, but I hope it was an entertaining experience for everybody. So I'm not that hard to find on Instagram. It's Aaron Sanders, all one word, dot Frostfather. more on the Frostfather nickname in the future. That it's a fun little story. Also on Twitter at @ASandersWindsor. I would give you my TikTok, but I believe TikToks are meant for eating after dinner instead of just going on there. But that's just me. So be sure to follow me on there. You know what, pretty much each and every weekend I'm around sports, whether if I'm calling them or PA announcing them. And with basketball season right around the corner here in the Rose City, it's going to be awfully busy. University basketball, pro basketball, more FIBA basketball to come, hopefully. And I invite everybody just to come along the ride with me. And I always tell people, it's like, even though I'm pushing 30, I usually tell them I'm not there yet, but I ain't through either.
Now, facts again,
Hey,
guys.
And
Aaron, last Monday was my birthday, and I'm an official old fart because I'm on Medicare.
oh my
Oh,
goodness.
damn.
But listen,
Well,
another year, and it's good to be blessed. And I do want to say, because I know there are people watching, and I always end my PA announcements with this: there are plenty of good sports out there, so you be one too.
dang, that is dope. And Bob, happy belated birthday, man. I'm sorry, I didn't get that to you, man. Appreciate you guys. It's been an amazing show. Aaron, we'll definitely have to have you back on again, guys. Swish for real, guys. You guys have a great weekend, and we are